Network Scholar at Peking University's School of International Studies in China. A specialist in Southeast Asian studies, Dr. Mustafa received his PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science on a full scholarship by the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, which he subsequently served as a research fellow. Wow, okay, what an impressive resume. Dr. Mustafa, please present your presentation.
Thank you very much, Uli, and for a very generous introduction. You made it impressive by reading it out. It's not that the CV is impressive. So thank you very much for that. I must also say the way you pronounce ICS is really good, because if you had pronounced it as ISIS, the people would mistake it from another group. Yes, in the Middle East.
Well, I'm glad.
Actually, we do call it ISIS, but we are trying to call it ICS now to distinguish ourselves.
Oh, gotcha.
But no, you did it correctly.
Well, I'm glad that I got it correctly.
Otherwise, I would have to clarify that I'm of the group that's in Singapore and not the one that's in the Middle East.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I also like to begin by thanking the School of Strategy and Global Studies for putting this event together. A very apt topic, a very important topic to discuss. And also in particular, by you, we have been having our correspondence by email. Thank you for having me. I think my initial contact was through Pak Yon as well, through my good friend Pak Shofwan from the International Relations Department at the Universitas Indonesia. Actually, my research foray into Indonesia started with Universitas Indonesia. This is probably about 5-6 years back now, because my journey actually started with Malaysia before I moved to Indonesia. So it's good to be back and contributing to the university, and in this case to the School of Strategy and Global Studies. It's also a privilege to share the platform with Pak Yon, and also of course with Ibu Patsy, who I'm sure I mean, it's pretty late there, I suppose, late in the evening and very early in the morning. Yeah. So I'm very surprised you have so many people very interested in this topic, which shows how important this topic is and how much interest it generates when we have a seminar like this. I must say, I mean, I was really mindful of, I work late nights, so I'm very mindful that I do not oversleep this morning. So I made sure I had 3-4 alarm clocks staggered their timing, so I would wake up. And also the fact that I'm in Singapore, we are 1 hour ahead, so I have to be mindful of that as well. But we are all here, and so it's certainly good to be here. So I'll begin my presentation. I've got about 20 minutes or so. Okay, so I thought perhaps to answer the question on whether it's a new development, I think it's good to perhaps look at 3 things. One is to look at the record of the Trump presidency with regard to the Middle East. Is to perhaps also suggest what we can expect from a Biden presidency. And also because we are in Southeast Asia and I look at Southeast Asia, what does this mean to us here in the region? So those are the 3 areas I'll be looking at, and depending on the timing, how much I can put forward. So let me begin with the Trump presidency. I think his record in the Middle East, in my view, is mixed, is checkered. There's certainly new developments there, but I think it's certainly mixed, and it's something that I want to kind of go through, as much as I can. And I'm sure the rest of the speakers will also come in and give their thoughts and enrich the discussion as well. Now, if we look at Trump, obviously at the top of his record, I suppose, most prominent would be the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords is, of course, the deal that was signed between three countries, essentially, UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. And Abraham, obviously, it's deliberately used because it's a prophet that connects all 3 religions there, the major religions there, being Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So certainly that is something that he took a lot of pride in. He certainly paraded that deal and hoping to get some domestic mileage as well. So that is something I think certainly a new development. Now the question is whether is it sustainable, and whether it's going to be effective in the long run. Now that Trump is no longer in the White House, so at least we hope he is not. They are still sort of, going into blows with each other as to who leaves the White House, who does not. To the extent we are having really jokes going around. One of the jokes being the reason why Trump is no longer in the White House because he is forbidden. Right, the BIDN is used for Biden. So we have all of this going on outside of the US. Well, it is in the interest of the US to have a smooth transition. So we'll have to see. Anyway, going back to the point I was making on the Abraham Accords, I think that is something that is certainly a new development. But the question is whether it's going to be sustainable or is it going to be effective in the long run. The question is, why did the countries in the Middle East accept this, or at least the two countries, UAE and Bahrain, accept it, and why did Israel accept this? Now, the only country in the world that has the diplomatic gravitas and the financial resources and the ability to connect with the countries in the region and to wield their influence is the United States. I don't think Russia, China, Europe would have been able to strike this deal. The only country that would have been able to do it, if they had wanted to do it, was the United States. So that's why I think it is the United States that got this deal done. Now, one of the reasons why this deal got done is, of course, one of the early decisions that was made by the administration was to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is something that every administration do think about, but they don't proceed with it. But this administration decided to go ahead with it. That actually was a signal to the leadership in Israel, particularly the Netanyahu government, who's obviously, we would say, more to the right in Israel politics. And I think that gesture allowed Netanyahu and Trump to have a much closer relationship than what Netanyahu had with his predecessor, Obama. And I think that particular decision, I think, helped as the discussions were progressing for there to be a deal with UAE and Bahrain. That's one. Second, I think for UAE and Bahrain, why is it for them? I think for them, obviously, they were looking at their own national interest. And for them, it's what can they get out of this deal? And for them, is they were going to get, weaponry, technological, I suppose, technological sort of research, development, expertise from the US, which in the past, because of having no diplomatic relations with Israel, that has caused them to suffer. So they wanted access to that, and this is what they're getting from the deal. They're certainly also getting, I would think, a number of economic agreements that are being signed, not just with the US and UAE and Bahrain, but also between UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. So they want to leverage on the technological, possibilities and expertise that's going to be available to them. Of course, the other reason is, of course, as an international relations person, is obviously to look at geopolitics. And for UAE and Bahrain, they've always been concerned about Iran in the neighborhood. And for them, striking this deal would help them to feel more secure. Now, that's obviously open to debate, but that's perhaps one of the second reason as to why that would have driven them to strike this deal. And well, that's the new development there. And also the idea there with the Trump administration, this would have a cascading or rollover effect to other countries in the Middle East to also sign up to this deal. Subsequently, we saw Sudan coming on board. And I think the idea is also to get other countries like Oman, the more moderate countries in the Middle East, to also sign up to this deal. Now there's a change in administration. I will have to see whether that actually pans out. Now, the other thing which we obviously have to talk about with the Trump administration is the Iran deal. Now, he obviously tore up the Iran deal. He walked away from it. I think that was, my view, a strategic mistake. It was one of the perhaps the most ridiculous decisions, and there are many that Trump has made. But I see this as a ridiculous decision. It's better to have a line of communication rather than have no communication at all. And so walking away from the deal, I think, was really playing to the domestic audience than really having any kind of strategic advantage for the United States. In fact, it has made the United States lose that line of communication where they could actually wield their influence on Iran. So that's the other thing which it's worth talking about. The third is, of course, the relations with Saudi Arabia. Now, if you look at Saudi Arabia, under Trump, they became really close. They had a very good relationship, in the sense because Trump looked at the Middle East in a very transactional mindset, right, and a very business-like approach, not really focused on good governance, human rights. That wasn't really in his agenda. It was more about America first. What can America get out of it? Whether is able to boost his domestic support. And and you have to, and any administration has to deal with Saudi Arabia. And in this case, I think there was cozying up, if you like, BFF between Trump and the leaders in, particularly Prince Bandar in Saudi Arabia. Now, so that's another sort of, you see a kind of a changing development, not necessarily a new one, but you see how the Trump administration is trying to manage his relations with different countries in the Middle East. Now, of course, the other thing is, because of that closeness with Saudi Arabia, the Trump administration took a hands-off approach when it came to Yemen, the war in Yemen, and that has caused untold suffering, carnage, and fatalities in that country. And also, of course, with Saudi Arabia, he also took the gas off the pedal with regard to the journalist that was murdered, the Turkish journalist, and so that also sort of got the foot off the pedal under the Trump administration. Now, the other thing is, of course, which he did was to try and wind down the troops from the region. And he did, obviously, I mean, I think we would consider Afghanistan to be part of the wider Middle East, to strike the deal there with the Taliban. So at least there's another deal going where you can bring different parties to the table, negotiate a way out for Afghanistan going forward. So these are some of the things that has happened, some good, some bad. Obviously, because of his being too close to Israel, that has had an impact on on the Palestinians. So the Palestinians, I think, more or less broke any kind of communication or a working relationship with an American administration, in this case, the Trump administration. As Trump is, of course, a very petty person, so if he's criticized, he will react. And I think the reaction was pretty distasteful, I suppose, shameful as well, in the sense that he removed support, or rather the aid that was going to the Palestinians, by withdrawing the aid to the UN agency that were helping the Palestinian refugees. So I think it was pretty much a broken connection with the Palestinians because of how Trump moved closer to Israel during his administration. The other thing which he did, I think it was quite dangerous, is to say that they have won the war against terror. He did at various times talk about it. It's certainly far from over. I think the fight against the Islamic State, against Al Qaeda is still around, by the way, and that still continues. And I think it would be a mistake for any administration to say that the war against terror is over. So that's Trump. I'm going to quickly go to Biden administration and talk about what we can expect. I think for Biden administration, I think we can expect something a lot more measured, more rational, I suppose, more level-headed. And also, I think for the Biden administration, I think the focus or the priority would be domestic before they look at anything on foreign policy. They're still not out of the pandemic. They are at the top of the table. I think I last checked. Some have said lightheartedly, of course, because many people have died, is that they are at the top of the Olympic table when it comes to COVID-19 infections. So there's something that he certainly has to deal with. It has to be a priority for him. Now, as far as foreign policy, obviously, the US is connected to international affairs. They can't do without it. So as far as the Middle East would go, I think for Biden, I think being supportive of Israel will not go away. I think it will continue, as the case for any administration in the US. It's just a question of how close you are. Some are closer than others. And I think for Biden, I don't think it's going to go to the extent that Trump has. And that is why I think there are voices in Israel, which obviously they wanted Trump to be re-elected because of the coziness that they had. But I think they will feel that there might be a change under a Biden administration. But I don't think the support for Israel would go away, in part because of obviously the historical relationship between the two countries, but also because of the strong lobby that we have in Washington, the pro-Israel lobby, which I think will not cause or will ensure as a watchdog that the administration remains supportive of Israel. What may well change is that the Biden administration would revive the communication with the Palestinians. I think if you look at the support that Biden had during the campaign, many of them obviously Arabs and Arab supportive of the Palestinian cause. You've got Democratic congresswomen particularly who are supportive. You have Rashida Tlaib, who is American of Palestinian descent. So you have people like that within the party. So you need to revive that communication with the Palestinians. So I think the aid that has been stopped by Trump, I think that would be that would resume, and I think they would try and find something to try and also placate the Palestinians and see whether anything can be done with regard to getting them their own homeland. My own view is I think the two-state solution, as far as we try and parade it, I think it's dead in the water. I think the only possibility now in the region, if you look at the design in the region, particularly in Israel-Palestine, is that it has to be a one-state, equal rights for everyone. I think that's perhaps the way to go forward. At least that's my view. I think on the Biden administration, he may well try and revive the Iran deal, but obviously he will approach that very cautiously because of the various actors back home in the United States, domestically speaking. But I think he does want to revive that connection. With regard to Saudi Arabia, I think obviously any administration has to have a relationship with Saudi Arabia. But again, I don't think he's going to be as closing up to the leadership in Saudi Arabia as Trump did. I think there would be a lot more criticism of human rights violations in that part of the world, including with Saudi Arabia. So I think the Saudi leaders are also a bit circumspect about what will happen during a Biden administration. Now, with regard to Biden as well, I think it's fair to say that he's not going to give any blank check or provide any blind support to the leaders in the Middle East. I think there will be some kind of strategy, and I think that strategy would be what perhaps would underpin a form of a Biden doctrine, perhaps, not just for the Middle East, but also about how America's foreign policy is going to be under his administration. I think as far as winding down troops, I think there is war fatigue. So I don't think that's going to happen. Another war in the Middle East, that at least my view at this point in time. I think whether they're going to remove troops from the region or they're going to wind down, I think that will depend a lot on who his defense advisors are and what they advise him to do. I also think under his administration, the Department of State will play a more prominent role in the Middle East, particularly, or just American foreign policy generally. So I think the White House and Department of State, I think, would be working a lot closer together, and more professional diplomats being at the front line in resolving many of these problems and also advancing America's interests in the world, and in particular in this case here in the Middle East. I don't think he's going to walk away from the Abraham Accords. I think that will continue. But I don't think he's going to push it to try and get other countries to join it unless they themselves want to join it. So I think that's how I think he's going to approach it. Of course, I think it's going to remain. Now, the last part before I end is on Southeast Asia. What does it mean for us here in the region? I think number one, it's very clear that the US remains an important geopolitical power and an important country with diplomatic gravitas and prowess in terms of how it has approached the Middle East. And I think for Southeast Asia, of course, for us here would be what kind of strategy that Biden would have towards the Indo-Pacific, first and foremost, and whether he is going to, return to the region in a more constructive way, take this region seriously. So I think it's all about having a more coherent, more consistent, a more sustainable strategy for the Indo-Pacific. I think for the region here, that's what I think we'll be looking at with the Biden administration. But as far as the Middle East goes, in Southeast Asia, particularly in countries, Indonesia, Malaysia in particular, and also we have a constituency in Singapore and of course in Brunei as well, where they are staunchly pro-Palestinian. So of course they will be keeping a close watch as to how the Biden administration would be, how their link to the Palestinians would be. What will they be doing to try and get the Palestinians their homeland? They will also be looking at how America links up with the other countries in the Middle East. Iran in particular, whether now, Iran obviously has been devastated by the sanctions. They certainly want to have some kind of relations, but of course they also know that, administrations, you have to deal with administration individually. There is no long-term strategy for Iran that I think we can talk about in a very significant way. So they will also, of course, say that, they have walked away from the deal. Can we actually trust the administration? So trust, I think, I think trust is one of the things that the Biden administration would have to deal with, and how to build up political trust in the Middle East as well. For the Saudis, just to go back, the Saudis will of course expect the Biden administration to be strong on Iran, because that's the arch enemy, arch nemesis in the Middle East. They don't want this access of Iranian-led Shia access to gain influence in the Middle East. So I think they would want the Biden administration to be strong. But I think what the Biden administration would do, I think they will balance between relations in Saudi Arabia and try and revive a connection with Iran, but not to give anything away because of the being mindful of being mindful of the domestic pushback that may well occur back home in the United States. Now, the last part is on the response to the Abraham Accords on Southeast Asia before I end. Now, the response is quite good. So it has been relatively, very diplomatic. Because remember, the countries in this region, they are pro-Palestinian, particularly the Muslim majority countries, but they also have very close relations with the UAE in particular. So when you look at the response to the Abraham Accords, it wasn't to criticize UAE, but to say that being too close to Israel would have a devastating impact on the Palestinians. So I think there's a reaffirmation when the Abraham Accords came into light, that the reaffirmation of the countries in this region towards the Palestinians, and also in large part because of the domestic support that they get within the countries as well. And to answer the question, to end, whether it's a new development, I think there are some examples of that being a new development, but I think the key question going forward is whether is it going to be sustainable and is it going to be effective? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bapak Mustafa. You were excellent in your explanation as well as in your time management.
Oh, okay, how long?
I
was very mindful of the time. So
I was going to let you know that you will have 1 more minute.
Excellent.
You were able to wrap it up under the time limit. Good. Thank you so much. So Bapak Mustafa has delivered a very smartly delivered presentation about how Trump administration has dealt with the Middle East through the Abraham Accords. And you're also making predictions about what's going to happen with the Biden administration. And one of your prediction is that he's going to be more level-headed, less petty. And you're also saying that right now it seems like Biden is going to focus more of his administration energy to deal with the internal issues within the US. And maybe after that, then he would still hold to the Abraham Accord, but not going to push for other Islamic countries to actually sign the accord, right? Thank you so much for that. And now I'm going to invite the next speaker, which is Mbak Mbak Patsy Kuswara, who's going to deliver the second presentation. I'm going to read Ibu, can I say Mbak Patsy, is that okay? What is it? The biography. And then I'm going to invite Mbak Patsy to deliver her presentation. So Mbak Patsy Kuswara is a senior White House correspondent to Voice of America English service since June 2018. She had worked as an anchor and producer at VOA Indonesian service since 2003. Mbak Patsy studied international relations as an undergraduate, and then she began her career as a broadcaster for a radio station in Jakarta in 1995. Then she worked as a reporter and presenter for Metro TV in 2000. She received Chevening Award to pursue a master's degree in journalism from Goldsmiths College, University of London in 2001. She then worked as a producer assistant for BBC and Channel 4. She now lives in Washington, D.C. with her son, Abioso Rossi. Mbak Patsy, I'm inviting you to present your presentation. Mbak Patsy, I think we're having issues with the sound. Is it just me having issues, or other people are not able to hear Mbak Patsy as well?
Not even see the video. Maybe Mas Joko can help with the technical problem.
With the audio, please. Sorry, Mbak Patsy.
Mohon maaf, statusnya di sini sudah on speakernya tuh.
Oh, Mbak Patsy, is there any issues with your internal audio system? No? We still cannot hear you. Do you want to try connecting with your phone? Is that what you're saying? Yes, okay. Then go ahead, try to connect with your phone so that hopefully the audio will be better. Usually what I do with my students during my Zoom classes is that I ask my student to connect with their phone, and then you can still operate your visual aid using your computer, using your laptop. So that way there's going to be two Mbak Patsy connecting. One is for the audio and the other one is for the video. Oh. It's not able. Oh, I don't know. Pak Joko, can you help?
Iya, gimana Mbak? Ada dua akun, satu lagi atau? Oh, oke. Sebentar.
Pak Joko, kayaknya Mbak Patsy mau mencoba masuk dengan.
Sudah masuk, sudah saya jadikan co-host dua-duanya, sudah bisa.
Ya,
dicoba.
Mbak Patsy mau coba lagi.
Bisa dengar sekarang?
Ya, bisa. Yang satu tolong di-mute, Mbak, biar nggak dua-duanya kedengeran.
How about now?
Masih ada ininya ya, masih ada echoing.
Di disable atau speakernya yang satu, yang tadi kendala mic-nya, speakernya di disable.
How about now?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. We did an audio test and it was fine. So anyway, let's start again. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So I am the White House correspondent with Voice of America, and it's been a very interesting week, to say the least, with the US election. So I'm happy to be talking about something other than the US election. I am going to start with my presentation just to give you an idea. Let me know if I am sharing now. Let's see. All right. I'm sharing. Am I sharing
Yes,
now?
you are. Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you again, everyone, for joining me. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the White House correspondent. I'm also a mom. What you see on screen right now is the White House booth, the Voice of America White House booth. We have a small booth in the basement of the White House. And at the bottom left, that is my son Abioso on a Take Your Sons and Daughters to Work Day. So this is what I usually juggle every day. As part of my job as a White House correspondent, of course, I attend press briefings. I also travel with the president when I am in rotation as the White House pool reporter. And then also during the campaign and after the election, I'm also pool reporter for the Biden and Harris campaign. And so let me just give you a little bit of an explanation of what a pool reporter is. You know, there's lots and lots of reporters and journalists. We can't all be in the same room with the president or with Joe Biden at the same time. So the White House Correspondents Association has this rotation of just a small group of reporters who can be on duty on that day, and then we share our information with everybody else. That's essentially what a pool reporter is. And so what I'm going to do with the Abraham Accords is what I'll do is first I'll give an analysis of what happens. Second, I'll give you a behind the scenes look of what happened in my, in what I see and what I hear as a White House correspondent. And then a third, very similar to what Pak Mustafa did, I will kind of look ahead to what the Biden administration might likely do. So the first one is, let's see, I'm gonna do this. The first one is an analysis of the Trump administration's Abraham Accords. And I'm really hoping that this doesn't freeze up again. I'm gonna start sharing again. This is the problem with technology. We think that it's great. Okay, so let's see. Share screen. Are you guys seeing this? Okay. President Donald Trump said he is marking. You guys can hear this, right?
Unfortunately, we cannot hear it.
Oh, okay, hang on. Okay, since you can't hear it from my end, can you play it from your end, the first link that I shared?
Bapak Joko, boleh tolong dibantu videonya, tolong dimainkan.
Baik, saya coba bantu share video yang tadi oleh Bu.
Ya, terima kasih.
Diplomatic effort by the Trump administration. I'm sorry.
Mikrofonnya salah satu harus di mute. Ya, terima kasih. Cuman yang ini yang di mute harus yang di komputer. Karena yang di komputer yang tidak, yang...
Baik, sebentar saya coba share ya, Bu.
Ya.
President Donald Trump said he is marking the dawn of a new Middle East as foreign ministers from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain joined Israel's prime minister at the White House Tuesday to sign the Abraham Accords, normalizing the two Gulf Arab states with Israel.
In Israel's entire history, there have previously been only two such agreements. Now we have achieved two in a single month, and there are more to follow.
The White House says the accords are named after Abraham, the patriarchal figure in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, who is seen as representing the potential for unity among the three faiths. The agreements are part of a broader diplomatic effort by the Trump administration to pressure Palestinians into accepting a peace deal, a strategy that experts call the outside-in approach.
And that is, if everybody recognizes Israel in its current borders, in its de facto control over all of Jerusalem, over the West Bank, and even the Gaza Strip, that would eventually force Palestinians essentially to acquiesce and leave them no choice, really, but to surrender to this reality on the ground.
You could say it's a back door, but I call it a smart door, not a back door.
In the West Bank Tuesday, people took to the streets to protest the deal, with Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Satayeh condemning the accords, calling it a black day in the history of Arab nations. Historically, Palestinians have relied on Arab states withholding recognition of Israel as a bargaining chip in their struggle towards statehood. Analysts say the agreement between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel reflect a changing regional calculation on the two-state solution.
And this is really a consolidation of some of the geopolitical shifts that we've been seeing that have been coming for decades, but that show that Arab Gulf states and Israel have more in common in terms of their opposition to Iran than they have in opposition in relation to their views on Palestinian aspirations for statehood.
Less than 2 months before the U.S. election, the Trump administration is touting the Abraham Accords as a foreign policy win. And while foreign policy may not rank as high of an election issue compared to the pandemic and the economy, the future of Israel matters to a key group of Trump supporters, evangelical Christians, who Pew data reports made up about a third of the president's supporters during the 2016 race. Patsy Widahuswara, VOA News.
Bapak Joko, sudah bisa dihentikan sharingnya? Halo Mbak Patsy, boleh dicoba lagi di-unmute? Masih mute, Mbak. Boleh diketik, Mbak, pesannya? Nah, bisa mendengar, Mbak.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn this off. Okay, now we're back to business. I am sorry about the technological challenges, but yeah, so I'm sorry that you can't really see that report, but what I'll do is I will give the link in the chat, and if you have time later on, you can watch it yourself. Okay, so that's the chat. So anyway, continue. So I'm going to go back to my screen sharing. Are you seeing me?
Yes.
So that was the analysis. Because you couldn't really see it, I'm just going to recap it essentially as, this Abraham Accords, what the Trump administration is doing is essentially employing the strategy, what they call an outside-in strategy. So if in the past, the dynamic of the Arab-Israeli relation has been determined by the dynamic between Israel and Palestine, what the Trump administration is trying to do is reverse that by saying, hey, how about we get Palestinian neighbors, the Arab neighbors, to agree to have normalized relations with Israel, and as a result, will kind of put Palestinians in a corner and essentially not give them any other options but to acquiesce. And the reason why Arab countries are agreeing to this, part of the reason is because basically the geopolitical calculation in the Middle East has changed. The impetus to have a Palestinian peace above all else is no longer there. Right now, Arab countries are more afraid of Iran, and therefore they're really putting they're siding together with the Saudis as well as the US. I'm sorry, I am hearing myself talk in this, so I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so that's kind of just a short analysis of what is behind the Trump administration's move of the Abraham Accords. And I think also in my report at the end, I added about a domestic motivator of why the Trump campaign is doing this, right? The Trump administration is doing this. And essentially, it's for a domestic political purpose. This happened in September. As you know, the American election in November. One of the things that the Trump campaign has really highlighted to Trump supporters, particularly evangelical Christians, is this Abraham Accords? You know, these are evangelical Christians who overwhelmingly voted for Trump in 2016. 86% of evangelical Christians supported Trump. And if you look at the American electorate, it's about 25%, about a quarter of the American electorate identify themselves as evangelical Christians. So this is an important support block for Donald Trump, and he really wants to keep it. And one of the ways that he keeps it is by creating this environment where Israel can be strong, and for evangelical Christians, for their own theological considerations, this is something that they want, and this is something that they support from the Trump administration. I want to just give you a little bit of a behind the scenes of what happened. Okay, so the first Abraham Accord was between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, and it happened on August 13th. So always the day before, we get what's called the daily guidance from the White House. And as you can see, for August 13 on Thursday, there was really nothing on the president's schedule, right? So I was supposed to come into the White House at 11 a.m. But at about 10 a.m., the White House called me and said, you have to have your COVID test and you have to be at the Oval Office by 11:20. And I was like, okay, 11:20, I'll do, by 10:20, I'll do my best. And so we rushed into the Oval Office. And then when I got into the Oval Office, they rushed us in. Let me see, share again. They rushed us into the Oval Office, and this was the scene that I saw. Okay, so this was President Donald Trump sitting at the Resolute desk, and behind him, you can see all his Mideast advisors, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The third man from the left, that is Avi Berkowitz. He is 30 years old, and he is basically Jared Kushner's friend. They play basketball together. But he has been instrumental in securing the Abraham Accords. So I'm gonna see if I can play this clip, which is just to give you an idea of what the president was feeling and thinking on that day when he announced the Abraham Accord between UAE and Israel.
The leaders, was there any hesitation on their part to reason this deal? No, it was like in love. It was a tremendous relationship that's been built up over the last, I would say, year. Before that, it was very tense, as everything in the Middle East is. It's very tense. It's a very tense place, but it's becoming less tense. And I have great relationships with all of the leaders. And some are enemies against each other, and I get along with both. That's, I guess, the big thing. People don't understand that about me. I've gotten along. Remember when I was elected, they said the war will start with somebody within days, and I've kept us out of war. You look at North Korea, everybody said, including President Obama, that's the biggest problem. Everybody said you'd be at war. Well, we're not at war. You would have been at war if I wasn't elected. It was somebody else. Now we're doing very well in the Middle East, and I'll tell you what, it's been an incredible thing. But no, it was tense, but the relationship has become a very good one between UAE and Israel, and also with other countries, many other countries. And I think you'll be seeing some very exciting things, including ultimately with the Palestinians. I think that's going to be happening at some point because it makes a lot of sense for them to let it happen.
Do you support annexation of Palestinian land by Israelis at this point?
Well, we're talking to Israel about that right now.
What about the snapback auction out around? Do you support that?
Oh, you really know your stuff, don't you? Well, we're not going to talk to you about that. We're going to work something out, and then we'll talk after it's completed. But it'll be a very satisfactory.
Why now?
So that was just to give you an idea, President Trump's mood at that time. And just to give you also a sense, when I came into that room, I had no idea what was going on. Nobody knew, right? I mean, it was not on his schedule. This was completely out of the blue. And the first thing that I thought when I saw all these Middle East advisors was that, oh my God, he's going to allow Israelis to annex Palestinian land. That was the first thing that was crossing through my mind. And that's why I asked him that question, do you support Israeli annexation to the Palestinians. And he said, well, we're still talking about it. But then afterwards, we know that as part of the deal of UAE and Israel normalizing relations would be that Israel would stop annexation of Palestinian land. And the second question that I asked him was whether or not he supported the snapback option on Iran, because obviously, I mean, to me, this was where this was heading. You know, this inside out strategy was a strategy to buffer against Iran. So that's what happened with the first Abraham Accords with Israeli and UAE. The second one, let me see if I can share again. The second Abraham Accord was with Bahrain, right? And that happened on also the next month on 9/11. And I remember very clearly because in the morning I had also been a pool reporter, and I had gone with President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump to go to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This is where the plane, one of the planes crashed on 9/11. And as you can see from his daily guidance, once he returns to Washington, D.C., there was nothing in his schedule that said anything about another peace agreement with between Israel and an Arab country. But that's what happened. You know, he called us in again, and he announced another Middle Eastern, another Arab country has signed on to the deal. And then the third part was when Sudan recognized Israel. This was on October in 2020. And I also happened to be in the Oval Office at that time. And what struck me at that time was the fact that the US had just taken Sudan off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. The US State Department has just taken Sudan off the list of state-sponsored terrorism. And then, you know, on the same day, they announced that Sudan and Israel will normalize relations. So that was what I asked the president. And let's see if I can do this. This is what I asked the president. Oh, now we have an ad.
You're also trying to remove Sudan from the state-sponsored list of terrorism. And can you speak a little bit about how that move or those plans are playing into the dynamics of the normalization deal with Israel?
Which plans?
To remove Sudan from the state-sponsored.
The dam, you said? The dam back to the?
No, the state-sponsored list, the list of state-sponsored.
Mr. President,
Okay, why don't I have you answer that?
so we've been working with Sudan for as long as I've been part of this administration to address this issue of state-sponsored terrorism. They did all the things that they needed to do. These two leaders of Sudan did all the right things. We now have a civilian-led government inside of Sudan. And so the rationale for them being designated state-sponsored no longer makes sense. We also wanted to make sure that victims of that terror had compensation. So we've now accounted for that. $335 million will go to the victims from those terror attacks. But now Sudan has fully complied with that, and their leaders have done great work. We want to support that civilian-led government. We want them to be successful, so it's completely appropriate that we would lift this. This will also be something that will help the Sudanese people and the Sudanese government. You'll see trade not only between Israel and Sudan, but between the United States and Sudan as well.
Sudan has great potential on trade and other things. I mean, it could be a very, very successful, wonderful country, and I think it will be. It's been hampered by what's going on in the world.
Can you explain how that connects to the normalization deal with Israel as well as negotiations?
Sure. They're connected in the sense that the Sudanese leadership made sense that they both had one thing in common. They made sense for the Sudanese people to build out their economy, to create democratic institutions, all the things that the Sudanese people have been demanding. They're connected in the sense of the Sudanese leadership is now driving towards a really good outcome.
So my point there is to show how the Trump administration is really, you know, giving carrots and also sticks to both UAEs and Bahrain and then also Sudan to create this environment where they say, okay, it makes sense for us to recognize Israel. We are going to ignore the Palestinian plights. We are going to accept whatever anger there may be domestically from our people. And so let me go back to my presentation.
Mbak Patsy, you have 3 more minutes.
Got it. One important thing is the response from Joe Biden, right? So I asked Joe Biden, this was a day after Kosovo and Serbia announced economic normalization. And part of the deal is also Kosovo recognizing Israel.
C-SPAN, more relevant than ever.
Sorry about all these ads.
President Trump has just announced an economic normalization deal between Serbia and Kosovo. And part of that deal is Kosovo and Israel having diplomatic normalization. You have stated that you support a two-state solution in the Middle East. Would you support more Muslim majority countries normalizing relations with Israel, even though it may mean that the Palestinians will lose leverage in their fight towards a two-state solution?
Well, first of all, I don't know what the deal is you're referring to, okay? What I have argued relative to Serbia and Kosovo is that Kosovo should be an independent country, not a part of Serbia. I've spent a lot of time there. And so I don't know how, I assume that would reinforce that independence, but I don't know based on what's being said. I think normalization of relations among countries is by and large, in almost every instance, a good thing. To have a Muslim majority country normalizing relations with Israel in a generic sense seems positive to me, but I have to know the detail.
So essentially, we get a sense of Joe Biden's policy in the Middle East from that question that I asked him. And just to recap really quickly, U.S. Middle East relations under Biden, like what has been mentioned by Mustafa, it will be a little bit more of a continuation rather than a reset. You know, there'll be a return to somewhat conventional foreign policy, building of alliances, but it's not going to change much. I think the Biden administration will also want to end all these foreign interventions, and the main departure will be Iran. The main departure will be, as been mentioned before, a return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and also again, human rights back into play. So if you're interested in more about behind the scenes stuff, I have a podcast on Spotify. It's called BTS Gedung Putih. And if you're interested in looking at Air Force One meals, you can look at it from my Instagram. Okay, so I hope I didn't go over time too much. I'm sorry about all the technological issues, but just to give you an idea, that was all the juicy behind the scenes stuff that happened with the Trump administration as they were trying to build towards this Abraham Accords. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patsy, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sorry as well for the technical glitches. It happens. I don't know why, but when it comes to webinars, somehow there's always some technical glitches. Thank you also for taking us behind the scene. And we feel like we were on a journey with you asking those questions. And you kind of highlight on the part of why President Trump seems to be so keen on this Abraham Accord by saying that 30% of his base who are evangelists are really supporting this Abraham Accord. And so by saying that, it seems like you're hinting that, again, this is for his personal gain in appeasing his base. Am I correct? I think you need to unmute yourself. Oh, wait.
Thank you. So definitely there is a political calculation evangelical Christians, and also the Jewish Israeli lobby is very, very strong and very organized in the US. But also consider the fact that it's not just Republicans who want this. Democrats also want this. And I think a big part of it is because there is no politicians in the US who can achieve much without the support of the Jewish Israeli lobby. So all of this has been good for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ma Patsy. And no, you're actually really good with time, so don't worry about that. There are some questions already, but I'm gonna make sure that we have Pak Yon Mahmudi present his ideas before we start opening up the question and answer forum. So our third speaker for this morning is Bapak Yon Mahmudi. Oh my God, I'm sorry, Bapak. So let me read your biography first, and then I will invite you to give your presentation. So Dr. Yon Mahmudi received his doctoral degree in 2007 in Asian Studies from Australian National University with a specialization in Islamic politics in Southeast Asia and Middle East. He had many publications, including a book on Islamizing Indonesia, the rise of Jemaah Tarbiyah, and the Prosperous Justice Party. In 2018, he was invited by the Brookings Institution to become a member of a working group that discussed Middle East issues and the Islamic world during US Islamic World Forum in New York City. He is now the head of the graduate program of Middle East and Islamic Studies at the School of Strategic and Global Studies, University of Indonesia. He's also the executive director of Inisiatif Moderasi Indonesia, or InMind Institute. Bapak Yon, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mbak Uli. And many thanks to the first speaker, our friend from Singapore, and also Bu Patsy, who already presented her idea about what happened right now, the U.S.-Arab-Israel relations. And also many thanks to Pak Bayu to have a very good collaboration between the American Studies and Middle East and Islamic Studies here in School of Strategic and Global Studies. And this is not kind of the normalization between the American Studies and Middle East, because we have a long history of good relationship. Let me present my idea and share my PowerPoint. Yep. Just a second. Yeah. In order to accommodate the audience in comprehending my presentation, let me talk in English, but my presentation mainly in Indonesia. The presentation still running. Just a second. Yep. Okay. Hope this is good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then, yeah. Let me give the background about the history of the relationship between the US and Arab-Israel. In the beginning, we see that the US supported the establishment of the Israel. And this is also against the majority of the stand of the Arab country. At the time, they were against the establishment of the Israel. But then the United States have tried to have a good relationship with the oil exporting countries such as Saudi and other Gulf countries. There is also very interesting events during the 1960s and 70s when the Egypt, Syrian, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, show their closeness with the Uni Soviet that have the socialist ideology, and initiated by the Gaddafi, then Libya, Egypt, and Sudan tried to form that they call the unified the Arab state. So the idea, if they want to have the unified the Arab state, not only for the Libya, Egypt, and Sudan, but also for the Syria and Iraq. At the time, those countries mainly influenced by the Soviet country. So this phenomenon at the time, I think, against what the United States want to have relation with the other Arab country. Another very important event that is in October 1973, when the Egypt and Syria launched a war against the Israel, that what we call as the Yom Kippur War. So the war between the Egypt and Syrians against the Arab, but then expand into the Israeli-Arab wars, because many Arab wars also joined against the Israel. In 12 October 1973, Richard Nixon allowed what they call the operation of the nickel grass, sending weapons and also troops to Israel, and also give financial assistance to the Israel, about 2.2 million US dollar. So this involvement of the United States in very frank and position supported the Israel, also creates another problem for the Arab country. Then they launched the kind of the oil boycott, stop and reduce the supply of the oil to the United States, all the allies of the United States, mainly coming from the European countries. So this is create the global crisis and make the United States, I think, aware about the significance to have the good relations with the Arab country. So in general, we can see that the U.S. policy in Middle East are first to make sure the oil supplies in safe condition, and also to make sure that the country around the oil supplies are U.S. friendly. So to make the U.S. friendly is very important. That's why they have relations with the Saudi, close relationship with the Saudi, close relationship with the Gulf country, mainly the oil exporting country. But then the second also, it is important, is to, because learning from the experience when there is kind of war against the Israel, in particular the Yom Kippur War that also caused the global crisis, economic crisis, and this is, I think, is must be considered. So in order to maintain the stability, I think the U.S. tried to make sure that the Arab countries do not confront or launch war against the Israel, because when the war against Israel happened, then the situation will be divided, either supported the Israel or they supported the Arab country. So this situation, I think, make the United States in the very difficult situation. Then the oil boycott would be used, to support the Arab country. So the best way, I think, to make sure that the Arab countries have good relationship with the Israel. So not to have the war with the Israel. That's why from this point of view, I see that the normalization of the Arab and Israeli relationship, I think, also part of an effort to make sure that the Arab country and the Israel have good relationship and do not, give kind of room to have confronted each other. But then the something that we can also see that the possibility that we see during the, in particular during the Cold War, was the widespread of the conflict among the Arab. So the conflict is not between between the Arab and the Israel, but the state is among the Arab countries. So we have the Kuwait and Iraq issues. We have the Iran-Iraq war and other war until currently. We have the Arab Spring. We have the war in Yemen. We have war in conflict in Libya, now in Sudan and Syria. Then I think another possibility also the emerging of the Iran, as part of the threat to the region. So the threat is not only to the region, to the most majority of the Arab country. The Iran also perceived as the threat to the Israel, and also perceived as the threat to the United States interest. Then how we see the normalization of the Israel with the United UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and probably will be followed by other Arab countries. First, we have to emphasize, according to my opinion, that the normalization, or we can see the Abrahamic Accords, mainly does not touch the essential issue of the Palestinian. So to make the Palestinian left behind, put the Palestinian in corner, because this accord, this normalization is between the Israel and the Arab countries, not specifically between, solve the issue of the Israel and the Palestinian conflict. So the issue is about the Arab and Israel. Then we have also to see something behind the normalization and something behind the accord. So I guess that all the normalization and also the agreement mainly consider about the interest of the Arab countries and the interest of the Israel, and also a United States will gain the opportunity because of those agreements. And there is also very important issue that we have to deal with about the issue of the security, the issue of the stability in the region. For instance, the UAE already proposed, for buying the aircraft F-35 long before, I think years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but the proposal was postponed by the United States. And this advanced technological weapon, F-35, and also some related to the drone, weapons, also very necessary for the United UEA and other Arab countries. Then after the sign of the deal, Trump, I think, promised that UEA will be allowed to buy F-35 aircraft that can be used to equip the defense technological equipment in the United States. United Emirates Arab, UEA. Then I think the contract will be about 50 F-35, yes. Sekitar ada 50 pesawat F-35 yang akan dibeli, will be bought by the UEA. So this is also will create concern about the issue of the security in the region. As we know that the only country in the Middle East who has the technological kind of the F-35 is only Israel. But now then, UEA will have the same technological aircraft, P-35, after signing the Abraham Accord. So the Abraham Accord, then some, observer consider this is kind of the arms race accord, off-sale accord, in order to, give justification to the Arab country to buy the weapons, and arms from the United States. We also have, Arab Saudi already bought the many weaponry equipments and arms from the United States. And we see also the situation when the China influence over the Middle East right now more dominant comparing to the previous years or previous decade. So that is also must be considered that the trade war between between the US and China also will brought the influence in the Middle East. For instance, the China also offer the more cheaper defense equipment, weapon and arms into the Arab country comparing to the United States proposal. As we know that the influence of the China, gaining big and big. For instance, China also have a relationship with the Iran in order to strengthen their relationship through the One Belt One Road project, when the China offered around 200 billion US for the infrastructure and project. This also including the defense equipment that defense cooperation between the China and Iran. And the China also try to have relationship with the Arab Saudi, have a good relationship with the UAE. So this is also, I think, become more dynamic issue in Middle East when we see about the normalization between the Israel and the Arab country. As many evidence prove that many weapons used during the war in the Yemen, Syria, and Libya also show that they were made in US or other country, for instance, Britain and Italy. So sending more weapons to the Arab country mean also to create further possibility to have a big war in the region. So when those countries with the high potential conflict have the advantage, high advanced weapons, then also will create another problem in particular related to the situation in the Middle East. For instance, war in Yemen, when the Saudi also used the weapon, used the aircraft to bomb the Yemen, that those equipment made in US and other also will be happen when the United Arab of Emirates and Saudi also have aggressive response and involvement intervention in Libya and also in Sudan. So this is we worry about the next situation after what we call the Abrahamic Accord. So the Abrahamic Accord, I think, is not only deal with the economic and political relations, but also open the new opportunity, to expand the military intervention to the other country. But now they can contain the issue between the Iran and the Arab countries. But we don't know when emerge a more aggressive country in the Middle East with the high sophisticated technological weapon, then we see what happens in the next future. So this is, I think, what we see, that normalization of the Israel and the Arab country, I think more about to prevent the Arab country to confront with the Israel rather than, to deal with the issue of the Palestinian people. So from this opinion, from this perspective, I think what we can conclude that the relationship between U.S., Israel, and Arab country, I think, need to be focused on the issue of in solving the Israel-Palestinian conflicts through the perspective of the win-win solution, because this is become the source of conflict, I think, in the Middle East. For instance, the policy of the Trump in acknowledging the Jerusalem as the ibu kota, the capital city of the Israel, also I think must be considered as part of give less opportunity for the Palestinian to be exist, as the state in the region. So the while the international international organization, for instance, UN, already acknowledge that the status quo of the Jerusalem. So the acknowledgement of the Jerusalem as part of the capital city of the Israel, I think, creating another problem. But the direct support of the United States to the Israel then will be another issue that we have to consider to see how the international organization can deal with the in solving the conflict between Israel and Palestine in win solution. So I think the two-state solution still, kind of promise proposal to maintain the peace in the region, rather than I don't know about one state solution that put the Palestinian under the authority of the Israel. Also, that is also become the long journey, I think, to settle this issue under one country, that is Israel, because will contribute to the issue of the discrimination about the minority under the majority Jewish country, that is Israel. The second, I think, we have to consider another important thing that we have to see, that trade war between U.S. and China already opened the new the proxy war propaganda that worry us in the region. First, there is kind of perception that the U.S. Perceived as pro-Israel against the Palestinian. For the Muslim country, I think this situation put the United States as the the state that are not in agreement with the Muslim countries. And the second, also the propaganda, the threat of the China that has the communist ideology. So propaganda, I think, will be dangerous, for the Muslim country if either they can play the propaganda of against the United States that pro-Israel, or in certain issue will be the propaganda against the domination, intervention, and the expansion of the China influence by using the issue of against the China, because China represents the communist state. So This, I think, will replace the Cold War between the US and the Soviet in the past by changing into new conflict, possible conflict between the US and China, and brought this conflict in the region of the Middle East. Because if the issue of the Palestinians and Israel is not solved very soon, then the propaganda against the United States that is help assist the Israel rather than Palestinian, I think will be widespread. And another also, in order to strengthen the relationship, to strengthen the existence of the United States in certain region, the issue of the China as the threat, the ideology that is not compatible with the Muslim country, I think also will widespread. So this is the possible of the propaganda either against or pro America or China. I think we should consider that will happen soon, or I think or late. Then we can see this is the tendency in Middle East. So we can see, for instance, in Indonesia, the close relationship between Indonesia, the visit of our defense minister of Indonesia to United States also indicate that need to have a strong relationship with the United States. But also in this country, we have also problem about the issue of the China domination, about the issue of the aggressive China, the Laut Cina Selatan, then also another create issue. Then we have to be able to manage the issue between those countries, then not make us as the victim of the war between US, China, or other that may happen in the Middle East, but also give impact also in Indonesia as the Muslim majority Muslim country. I think that's all. Yep.
Oh, thank you.
I can share my idea. Thank you very much, Uli.
Thank you, Pak Yon. I was just going to let you know that you have 1 more minute.
Yep.
To wrap up. And thank you so much for the presentation. You brought up many interesting points, especially the ones about weapons, as well as providing us with the history of the Middle East relationship and Israel with the United States. So thank you for the presentation. And now, since we only have 20 minutes for our discussions, I would like to start opening up the discussion forum. And I have already collected 5 questions that were asked by the participants. So for people who are interested, so the participants who are interested in asking questions, I would encourage you to type your questions in the chat column, and you can ask either in Indonesian or in English, and I will help translate it for the speakers. So let's start with the first question, which is from Bapak Muhammad Fuad. And having said that, can I ask Bapak Joko to help Mbak Patsy to unmute? Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, perfect. So the first question is from Pak Fuad. Pak Fuad says that he's not sure how far actually the role of Trump administration in brokering the Abraham Accord. I think the Middle East countries who decided to have a diplomatic relationship with Israel have strong reasons of their own. So it is more the interest of those countries than the US, although of course the Trump administration took advantage of it. Do any of the speakers would like to share their opinion about Pak Fuad's statement?
So I can jump in just to give you a sense of what the Trump administration sense is on the Abraham Accord. So sometimes to understand President Trump, you have to kind of speculate what his motives are. And one of the things that has bothered President Trump a lot is the fact that President Obama was given a Nobel Peace Prize in the year 2009 for the Middle East peace process, even though he basically did nothing. So President Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize in 2009 just for the promise of a Middle East peace deal. So entering the White House, one of the things that President Trump has always wanted is this Middle East peace deal, which he calls the deal of the century. And he has, from the very beginning, assigned his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to really make this deal happen, right? And there's been a lot of movement on the ground. This is, I think, in fact, one of the most concrete foreign policy initiative that we can see on the ground. For example, from the economic summit in Bahrain, one Palestinian analyst put it as the way the Trump administration wants to approach this is by collecting people together, throwing a bunch of money at them, and see what can happen. So I think the other two panelists have described very well in terms of what are the economic and military incentives that the Trump administration has provided to all these Arab countries, UAE and Bahrain, to be able to get closer to a Middle East peace deal. The question is, what kind of deal is this when the Palestinians completely reject it, right? I mean, that's the question. And I think there's also a question in terms of one of the participants is asking, what does this mean for the two-state solution? Will this end up being a one-state solution? Right, exactly. I mean, this is essentially a two-state solution where the US and Israel draws the map for Israel and leaves Palestinians not even in the room, because the Palestinians don't want to engage, they haven't been invited, and so they're creating this environment where Palestinians really have no choice but to accept a really bad deal or a no deal at all. So the question becomes, does this lead to a one-state solution rather than a two-state solution? And even in that case, it's problematic for Israel, because then Israel will have to choose what kind of identity does it want. Does it want to be a Jewish state, or does it want to be a democracy? If it wants to be a democracy, it has to allow the same rights for Palestinian, Israeli Palestinians as Jewish Israelis. So that involves a lot of terms in terms of who they elect as their representatives, what kind of policies they will enact. So this is also it's not an easy answer for anybody, but for now, the aim of the Trump administration is to be able to, number one, gain a lot of credit from the American evangelical Christians who support this policy. And number two, just try to get the Middle Eastern countries to kind of change their way of thinking and leave the dynamics of peace with Palestinians aside for now, considering their interest in facing Iran, as well as building a better relationship with Israel. I think that's part of the motivation.
Sorry, can I just chime in as well, just to add to what Patsy has already said. I think the first thing to note is that there were already economic activities, even security cooperation taking place between Middle East countries and Israel before the Abraham Accords. It's just that it was relatively discreet, quiet, didn't want to make a big deal out of it. So it wasn't that it was out of the blue we wanted to have a relationship. I mean, just relationships were going on, activities were going on. That's one. Second, I think it may well be the case that the Arab countries like the UAE and Bahrain have their national interests and certain certain incentives to strike this deal. But you need a country to be able to bring those Middle Eastern countries and Israel together, right? And the only country that can do that is the United States, because as also mentioned, if they cannot, they'll throw money at it. They'll throw all kinds of incentives to get them to the table. So without US, if you like, a kind of a broker, I don't think this deal would have been done. It could be Trump, it could have been Biden, it could have been anyone. But you needed the United States to come in, and you needed the United States to show Israel, particularly if the countries on the far right, that they are going to be not just pro-Israel, but they are going to show why they are pro-Israel in terms of their deeds. And that's why I mentioned earlier about that moving of the embassy to Jerusalem actually was significant indicator of what kind of relationship the Trump administration wanted to have with Israel. I think if that did not happen, I don't think this deal would have been struck. At least that's my view. The third thing I wanted to just say on the one-state solution and two-state solution, I mean, as far as the international community goes, I mean, I use that quite loosely, is that this is a two-state solution. Every year in the United Nations, there is a vote on the question of Palestine. All the countries would vote for it, apart from Israel, the US, and at times depending on the governments in Australia and Canada, and also the countries in the South Pacific. The rest of the countries in the world would vote for this resolution. And I think the problem with the one-state solution, I think the problem for the East, for Israeli leadership of the one-state solution, is that it also requires the right of return for the Palestinians. And I think for them is that when that happens, they're going to be overrun and become minority in that country. So I think this is, we just have to, I think they just need to, I think the only way out is when they get some kind of war fatigue and they don't want to fight anymore. But anyway, that's just my view on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapak Mustafa. Pak Yon, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I just want to say that how the Abrahamic Accord happened. So in the U.S. perspective, that the Abrahamic Accords related to the interest of the United States, or also the interest of the Israel. So how the U.S. saw its support to the Israel, but in the perspective of the Arab countries saw their own national interests. Yeah. They do not touch, the significant issue of the Palestinians. So the issue is how they can gain more access to the United States, more close relation to the Israel. As I say that also because their proposal to have more equipped weapons in advanced technology postponed, because of the disagreement between I think because of the protest of the Israel. But when they can show that they have good relationship with the Arab and the Israel, then another deal that the Arab country want to have in terms of defense and economic can be realized. So this is, I think, the issue of the Abrahamic, more related to how the Arab country want to have a good close relationship to keep the United States still exist as the hegemonic state in the Middle East, because the Arab country face the threat of the Iran. Yeah.
Thank you, Bapak Yon. I'm now going to read the question the question from Bapak Khairil Zaki. His question is, to what extent do you think Iran's influence in the Middle East region could still threaten Arab Gulf states' interests, so that they see the importance of normalization ties with Israel as the best measure to deal with Iran? Do you think the US sanction and US military campaign to Iran under Trump's administrations are insufficient to weaken Iran's influence?
I can chime in first. I think
yes, of course, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for as far as Iran goes, I think the first thing to remember about whether it's a perception or reality. What is it that Iran has done to cause this panic in the region, right? Have they engaged in a war? Have they started a war? What exactly have they done? I think we have to be very careful in terms of really bring tangible examples to make that determination that Iran is a threat. That's one. Second is that if you look at, and also the impact in this region as well, much of the export of a kind of a very exclusivist understanding of Islam doesn't come from Iran. It comes from Saudi Arabia. And also a few other, even in Qatar with the Muslim Brotherhood, and fundamental ideological underpinnings. This doesn't come from Iran. And I think much of the threat we feel in this region, and also the ideological underpinnings of the terrorist groups, come from the thinking that has arisen from countries like Saudi Arabia. So I think we should be mindful of that. Now, as far as whether US, whether it can weaken Iranian influence, I mean, they are already weakening Iran's economy. But I don't think it's weakening its influence in the region, particularly in those countries that Iran can relate to, right? So Syria is has been Iran's very close ally. You also see them having very close relations with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Bahrain to some extent, because they are a majority Shia country as well. But you see, it's about the perception of this axis being formed. I think at the end of the day, it's all about who wields the greatest influence in the Middle East. And this is something, and I'll end on this. There is this theory on managed chaos, right? What the US wants in the region is not peace and stability. They want some form of chaos. They're happy when countries rival and fight with each other. So it weakens everybody. What I mean managed chaos is that they want chaos, but they want to manage it to the extent that their interest is not undermined. I think that's really what we are seeing. Thank you.
Let me just
go ahead, Mbak Patsy.
Let me just add, just to remind everyone, there's just a really significant difference in approach towards Iran under the Obama administration and under the Trump administration, and we will see what happened in the Biden administration. We assume that the Biden administration will, return closer to the Obama approach. And the difference in approach is that under the Obama administration, what they have done to Iran is essentially try to get Iran to be part of this international world order by creating the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, right? They want to create incentives for Iran to play by global rules, don't have nuclear weapons, stop supporting Hezbollah and Hamas, just be a good boy in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the approach of President Trump is completely different. He released the US, he withdrew from the nuclear agreement 2015, he withdrew in 2017, one of the first things that he did in office. And then what he's done is he's created this dynamic in the Middle East where it's the Saudis, Israelis, and all the other Arab countries. And this is how he gives them security, by putting them under this nuclear umbrella and not using the same kind of multilateral approach that the Obama administration has done. Now, going forward, I think what we'll see under the Biden administration is that he'll definitely want to return to JCPOA, and he'll definitely want a sort of like a rebalancing in the Middle East to make the balance of power hub, not just under Israel and the Saudis, but in a way also include Iran somehow. Now, we don't know which approach will work because, by the end of the Obama administration, we see somewhat detente with Iran and a slowing down of the Iran nuclear weapons, and then under Trump we see sanctions and a lot of sticks and a lot of pressure towards Iran. So we'll see what happens under the Biden administration.
Sorry, Uli, can I just come in very quickly before? Just one other point I wanted to just make is that these sanctions, and I think Patsy is absolutely right here, sanctions do not work. What it has done, it has isolated Iran. And I think what Obama attempted to do, as Patsy rightly put it, is to try and get them to the table, be part of a world order by which, not a world order, I mean, it a kind of a system by which it becomes a valuable member. And I think that's what Obama has tried to do. But I think the pushback, particularly back home, with those who are staunchly pro-Israel and from Israel itself, there's a lot of pressure to get that deal torn apart. So when Trump came into the office, I think it was pretty clear, I think, from the outset that that deal was going to be disintegrated. They're going to remove it altogether, and that's what we see. The other point I just want to make very quickly, I think relations between Iran and US, it has been hot and cold since 1979, after the Iranian Revolution. Of course, later on you had the hostage crisis as well. So I think you also have to look not just at what US wants to do in Iran, but what does Iran want? Always think about what the Iranian people want. Right? We always lose that when we talk about this discussion on US. And one final point, is that I think as far as Biden goes, I think we will not expect him to do that kind of charismatic speech in Cairo that we saw with Obama. I think we can forget about that. Neither will we see perhaps that kind of Trump going all guns blazing and a gung-ho approach. I think he'll probably take some form of a middle path, and then we'll have to see whether the results sort of the outcomes meet the approach, as Patsy put it, in the way the Biden administration will approach the Middle East. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pak Mustafa. I am wondering whether Bapak Yon would like to add something about this question regarding Iran and the U.S. relationship. And I think Bapak Mustafa brought up a very important point about why is it that we always perceive it from the U.S. perspective, but we never question what do the Iranian people want. Go ahead, Bapak Yon.
Yeah, I think we also have to see that how the Iranian government perceive about the sanction, that in the beginning they want to have the sanction is lifted, and we want to see also the Biden administrative will see different approach comparing to the Trump, and the negotiation will happen, and Iranian government also will comply with the requirement of the negotiation. So the more room to negotiation in the future, I think, will be possible. And the key also, the Iranian also should give more room to the United States to be involved in the kind of the relationship, business, and other things, that if they can, come together on the table to talk about the future of the Iranians and also about the lifting the sanction, the possibility to have the normalization of relationship between the Iran and the United States also will be possible, and further development also will involve another far future. I think that will also we will see the it is possible or not, but we will see possibly the possible normalization between the Iranian and the Israeli country. But it is something people not believe it that will be happen. But the possibility to have negotiation, I think, will be there. But also we have to consider also the role, the influence of China also in the within the Iranian government also becomes strong and strong. So it also depends with the negotiation, the way of the United States and the China to deal each other. So that's all.
So Uli, can I just come in very quickly, very quick point? I know there are a lot of questions. I think just this point that I think for Iran, and I agree with Pak Yon, I think the long-term aspiration is to have some form of normalized relationship between the US and Iran. In the short term, I think the problem or the sticking point is that so long as Iran does not recognize Israel, US is not going to recognize any kind of normalization with Iran. All they are trying to do is try and reach kind of agreement with Iran that they are able to keep a close watch on their nuclear program. I think that's basically it. And I think that's how you're going to look at it. On China, very quickly as well, I absolutely agree with Pak Yon. I think China and even Russia has great interest in the Middle East. And particularly, they have been very close to Iran. And I think China does want to develop closer relations with Iran, but it's somewhat halted because of the sanctions that are being imposed. And for China did come out and welcome the Abraham Accords. It does want to see a sort of stability in the Middle East, but I think it does also want to look after its own interests. Because of US bases mostly in the Middle East, the way China is dealing, or rather trying to engage with the region, is actually in two ways. One is through Iran, but also the other through Pakistan. So the port that they are building in Pakistan, the Gwadar port, is a port by which they are trying and engage the Middle East. So that's how they're going to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Bapak Mustafa. But Patsy, do you want to add anything before we move on to the last question for the day?
I I just want to touch on this question, which I think is really important. Why do the Saudis seem to have placed itself in a rear position instead of leading the movement? I think that's a really important question to be asked here. This is from Muhammad Fuad. Well, the short answer is because the Saudis want to see how it plays out, right? But we know for sure that there is no way this Abraham Accords could materialize. There is no way that UAE and Bahrain could have signed on to this without the blessing of the Saudis, considering how close they are in terms of relationships. So there has to be some blessing. But of course, the Saudis want to see first, how are the Arab streets, how are their people reacting to this? And what's really telling is the fact that right after the first Abraham Accords with UAE, there was no statement of condemnation from the Arab League. It was, adem-adem aja. People just kind of accepted it and then moved on, which showed us a really big shift that has happened geopolitically in the Middle East. And which is why, when President Trump says things in the Oval Office, for example, yeah, we're going to have a lot of countries signing up next, including the Saudis, including Iran, and including Palestine. And, we journalists are just kind of like, really? But then when we look at the situation on the ground, I mean, he may be onto something, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. There may be some interest, there may be some incentives being given to the Saudi government that will eventually lead to that. But, obviously that will be like huge news.
I was actually going to ask that. Thank you, Mbak Betsy, for actually answering the last question for our discussion today. Bapak Mustafa, do you want to add something?
Yes, I think Betsy is right that without Saudi blessings, the Abraham Accords would not go through. But certainly the Saudis are not going to be the ones to sign the accord, because they do want to see themselves as the leader of the Arab world, and the Arab world is still divided as far as Israel goes, because many of the countries also look to the domestic population. Although in UAE you don't see much domestic pushback on the deal, we saw quite a bit of domestic pushback in Bahrain when they signed up to the deal. So the domestic element still remains a very important fact. One other thing I think we didn't actually discuss in this session, which I think is also still very important, is this idea of Islamophobia. I think this is something that the OIC has constantly talked about, and being a very an issue of great concern, around the world, and including in the United States. And I think with this Biden administration, I think also because of the support that he got through the campaign, I think you will see efforts in bringing down, or rather combating, Islamophobia, which I think needs to be done. And perhaps by doing that, he may well endear himself closer to the Arab world or to the Middle East as well. And one final point I wanted to just make as well is that I like the way Pak Yon talked about the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict and how we have gotten here. Now, how we go forward, I think, and I think this is important, I'll end on this. I think we must be careful to remember that Biden is also a politician, all right? So first and foremost, it's all about, the domestic support that he gets, right? And so his U.S. foreign policy is also going to have a domestic link. If he wants to get re-elected, if he really wants to be re-elected, subsequently, or another Democratic candidate wants it to remain a Democratic White House, he has to take into account, as has been mentioned by Patsy, particularly with Israel, the evangelical Christians, but also there's another group called the Christian Zionists as well. They're somewhat, they kind of overlap, but they're quite different. They're also Muslim Zionists. They're also obviously the Jews who are Zionists. So you have many different segments here which all want to wield influence as far as the relations between US and the Middle East is concerned. So going forward, I think for Biden, he is a politician. Don't look at him as a savior of the Middle East, but I think we can look at him providing perhaps some kind of consistency, clarity, coherence, right, on US policy towards the Middle East. I think perhaps that's the least we can expect from him. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Mustafa. Unfortunately, Mbak Patsy has to leave. Mbak Patsy, do you have anything last word?
No, just thank you, and sorry about the tech issues, but I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Mbak Patsy. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Mbak Betsy. Thank you.
Unfortunately, yes. Our time is almost over. We are going to invite Bapak Muhammad Fuad to give a closing remark for this seminar today. Bapak Fuad.
Cek suara dulu ya. Kedengaran?
Ya, kedengaran.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mbak Uli, for the honor given to me to make this closing remarks for this webinar. I'm quite happy. I'm very happy with this seminar today. What I heard, I think, what I've heard this seminar are examples of what the academic community can do, regarding the Arab-Israeli problem, its relationship with the United States and everything. And the reason for that, for my happiness, is because, I've been teaching the American Studies for many, many years. And when the School of Strategic and Global Studies was formed, I was also inside the school, actually. And, at the time, I was envisioning that the direction of this School for Strategic and Global Studies would be taking was this kind, of, is exemplified by the webinar that we're having, that we just had right now. So this kind of, a more integrated study of America in relationship with the world, actually, it should be the general direction of the school. And this seminar has been an example for that, I think. And it's been a sort of extraordinary example, because another role of the academic community that I think has to play is to, provide an analysis that is, the urea, the breakdown of the situation, so that, and so to provide the community with the facts of what's happening on the ground, so that we, as Indonesians especially, when we react to the problem in the Middle East and its relationship with the United States especially, it's not based on emotion, but based on, some kind of academic analysis that, and I think what we have heard in the seminar is a very, very good example of that kind of factual analysis, what's happening on the ground. So that's another reason why I'm very happy. And because the problem is very complex, as we have heard from the analysis of the speakers today, and that complexity can only be unraveled through this kind of academic analysis, and that's what we badly need in this country of Indonesia that we are supposed to love. I think that's more or less my impression of the. So again, I'm very happy with the seminar, and I hope that this seminar will be, the example of the going forward direction for the school in general, so that we have more discussion, not only the relationship between the United States and the Middle Eastern countries, but also with China, that will be the topic of our next webinar, and also with Southeast, with East Asia, Japan, Korea, etc., and also with Southeast Asia. So that's, and the last thing that I want to say is that I like to express my gratitude to the speakers, Pak Mustafa, Pak Patsi, and also Pak Yon, the rising star in the Kajian Timur Tengah. Thank you very much. And juga for the audience, I'm very happy also that the audience keep on sticking to this program until the end. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih banyak, Bapak. Thank you so much. Everyone, I would ask everyone to turn on their camera. And I do want to give a big applause to the speakers, Bapak Yon, Bapak Mustafa, What amazing discussions. I learned so much from being the moderator and listening to your presentations, and also to the participants for asking such wonderful, smart, critical questions that allow us to learn so much from today's discussion. And for that, thank you, Bapak Bayu, for inviting me to be the moderator for the day. If everybody can turn on their camera, and then I'm gonna ask Bapak Joko to take pictures for all of us. Bapak Bayu, would you care to say something about what we need to do after this? Just taking pictures?
Ya, jadi mungkin untuk ini ya kata penutup for the closing remark for me, for as the head of the department, I would like to say once again thank you for all the presenters as well as moderator and all the participants again for staying here until the end of the webinar. Okay, thank you so much for the contributions, and I would like to say hello to everyone. I cannot address you one by one, but I saw some names that I'm familiar with. So if I cannot say hi to you personally, maybe after this we can take a picture together, and then we can unmute the microphone. And if you want to say hi to one another, that will be the time to do that. Okay. So once again, thank you very much. Let's take picture, and after this we can greet one another. Thank you, Uli.
Thank you, Mas. Who's going to take picture? Is it Bapak Joko?
I think so. Yeah. I think Mas Joko will take a picture. Silakan Mas Joko.
Baik Bapak, mohon berkenan mengaktifkan kameranya Bapak Ibu semuanya. Oke, ada 2 halaman. 1, 2, 3. Oke, halaman kedua. 1, 2, 3. Baik, sudah Bapak Ibu semua, terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Baik. Salam dari saya, selamat malam, saya pamit. Thank you so much.
Ya, terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Mbak Uli, terima kasih, Pak Mustafa. Sampai ketemu.
Ya.
Terima kasih Bapak.
Terima kasih Pak Mustafa.
Thank you very much for today. Sukses.
Terima kasih untuk semua pembicara.
Bapak Ibu dosen KWA, terima kasih sudah hadir. Ada Pak Alfred, Bu Retno, Bu Irit, Bu Riani, Pak Ronald. Ya, terima kasih sudah hadir.
Terima kasih juga Pak Bayu.
Terima kasih Pak Bayu.
Ya.
Terima kasih.
Ya.
Ya.
Acaranya sukses Pak.
Luar biasa.
Mr. Bayu.
Tambah pintar kita semua. Thank
Ya.
you.
Thank you.
Teman-teman dari ASI.
Halo Pak Alfred.
Ya.
Bye.
Mas Bayu,
Thank you,
ada redaktur,
Prof.
ada
Mustafa.
Mas Baim.
Oh iya.
Nah, ya.
Very interesting.
Ya.
Thank you, Pak.
Terima kasih Pak. Siapa Mustafa? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ya.
Till next time, Pak. About 3 months from now.
Di situ gitu. Betul memang. Tetapi karena tidak meneliti di berbagai teknik, maka dia tidak menjadi variabel. Kecuali kalau penelitian itu dilakukan dengan pendekatan etnomutasi.
Okay, Pak Bayu, I take my leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again, Pak Mustafa.
No,
I'll see you next time.
Thank you Pak Mustafa. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Hopefully this is a start of many other
exactly
times to try and engage
exactly
your
right.
students.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's
Let's hope
give
for
you
this.
more